This morning, honorable members, will be led by the Lord's Prayer, and I'm asking Reverend Gentleman from Marco City to please lead us.
Our Father,
One in heaven,
hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come.
thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Give us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Keith Bell, Wayne Monroe, Vaughn Miller, Jobeth Colby Davis, Ginger Moxie, Mario Boleg, Jomo Campbell, Basil McIntosh, Miles LaRota, Pia Glover Roll, Lisa Ramming, Zane Lightbourne, Dr. Hubert Minnis, Jamal Strawn, John Pinder, Marcus Roll, Leon Lundy, Kirk Cornish, Wade Watson, Leonardo Lightbourne, Leslia Miller Bryce, Leroy Major, Sylvanus Petty, Mikel Bonnaby, Michael Pintard, James Quaid Thompson, Aram Lewis, Shannon Dawn Cartwright, Adrian Gibson, Adrian White.
Good morning, honorable members. We are getting ready to go into debate of the law revision. I predict, as I put it into the atmosphere, that we will have a smooth debate today. Right, honorable members? No. And I didn't hear Marco City reply, so I guess he's going to be my worst people today. Now, let's get ready to get into the people's business. Introduction and swearing of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. Thank you, honorable member. Statement of communication by ministers. Thank you, honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for North Andros and the Berry Islands.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I just want to go ahead and send a quick shout out to my grandmother, because I'm not planning on being here all day of emergency, but I'd like to send a shout out to my grandmother. Her birthday is today, 83-year-old, and to my grandaunt who's 77. Just wanted to say it quickly, please.
Thank you, honorable member. For them, we say happy birthday. But remember member statement for that, eh? Communications by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motion for leave of absence, leave to resign, seat in new ranks. Presentation of petitions. Presentation of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. Second reading in committee of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Centerville.
Good morning, Madam Speaker.
Good morning, honorable member.
Madam Speaker, I rise on behalf of the residents of the great constituency of Centerville. I'm grateful to them for the opportunity to represent them in this place. I also wish to voice my gratitude, Madam Speaker, to the great architect of the universe, and thank him for life, health, and strength, not only for myself, but for that of my family, my colleagues, and the wider Bahamian community. Madam Speaker, we are living in times when we cannot and should not take the gift of
Good
another
morning,
day.
honorable member. Excuse me. Are we moving the motion for the reading of the bill, the second reading of the bill, and reading the long title this morning?
Mr. Speaker, I move for the second reading of the Law Reform and Revision Bill 2023.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
Madam Speaker, I see that my colleagues this morning are indeed following your advice and we're staying in the spirit, Madam Speaker.
Yes, stay focused.
Indeed. Madam Speaker, we are living in times when we cannot and should not take the gift of another day of being healthy and strong for granted. I'm fully cognizant that without the support of the people in Centerville, I would not have the opportunity to be in this honorable place. I am also aware that I must do my best to retain their confidence and support, as is the case with all of us fortunate enough to be assembled here today. This being the case, I am doing all that I can to serve and represent the people of Centerville well. Let me take this opportunity, Madam Speaker, to pay my respects to the late Mr. Winfield Brown from Odell Corner, who was laid to rest Saturday past. I wasn't able to attend the service, but the thoughts and prayers of my family and the Centerville community are with him and his family and friends. Also, on another very sad note, I wish to extend sincere condolences to the family of Allison and Trevor Nika, the mother and daughter who were found murdered in their residence of Ross Corner. This news shook our community last week. Madam Speaker, violence is never the right answer, and as best we can, we must always strive to be our brother's keepers. If we see or hear a crime, assault being committed, let us reach out to the Royal Bahamas Police Force and other stakeholders to save a life. Madam Speaker, may they rest in eternal peace, and may their souls rise again in glory. The last time I spoke in this place, Madam Speaker, I mentioned that Centerville Primary won their category in this year's Junior Junkanoo Parade. In celebration of this achievement, I, along with the Centerville Urban Renewal team, visited the school where we treated the staff and students to lunch and were able to provide school and sporting supplies. I want to publicly thank our corporate partners in this exercise, C.A. Christie Real Estate, Home Fabrics, and UNICEF for their assistance in making this happen. Also, on April 1st, the second annual Harvest of Love in Centerville event was held for our senior citizens and the disabled. Residents in these categories, along with their parents and guardians and or caregivers, were able to come to Centerville Park and collect fresh produce, fruits and vegetables and other grocery items like grits, bread, and Bahamian-made juices, etc., at no cost. I wish to thank the member for Southern Shores, Senator Young, who's in the other place, and all of our corporate sponsors, Madam Speaker, for their contribution to making this year's event a success. Over the recent Easter holiday, members of Team Centerville traversed the constituency in what is called the Centerville Easter Bunny Hop, delivering Easter baskets and smiles to the children of Centerville. I thank the team that makes this happen every single year for our children. And I wish to publicly invite residents of the constituency and also friends of the constituency who have not yet done so to get involved in what is happening in the neighborhoods and communities of Centerville by following us on Facebook or contacting us at our constituency office, which is open Monday through Thursdays and also Saturday. As we all know, working together for the betterment of each other is how we achieve positive results. Madam Speaker, the Bahamas is well on its way toward the 50th anniversary of our independence. This is an incredible milestone for any country. I think it would be especially significant for those who were present at the first independence celebration who are still with us today. I want to thank our Prime Minister, the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, the Honorable Philip Davis, for having the vision to bring Bahamians together in celebration, not just on Independence Day, but throughout the year. The efforts of our colleague, the member for Seabreeze, the Honorable Leslie Bryce, and her team at the Independence Secretariat should also be commended. Madam Speaker, in my short time in public life, it is apparent that just as adults in a household, the government sets the tune in our country, whether it be a good or bad one. Just as the generation of leaders at the time before independence were, we, on both sides of the aisle, must be deliberate in leadership of the people of this country, understanding that what we do here today will affect generations of Bahamians tomorrow.
That's right.
Madam Speaker, one only need read the preamble of our Constitution to know that those Bahamians of that time were deliberate and thoughtful in their leadership. It reads in part, "We, the inheritors of and successors to this family of islands, recognizing the supremacy of God and believing in the fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual, do hereby proclaim in solemn praise the establishment of a free and democratic sovereign nation founded on spiritual values." Madam Speaker, is it okay for me to say that again? Founded on spiritual values, and in which no man, woman, or child shall ever be a slave or bondsman to anyone, or their labor exploited, or their lives frustrated by deprivation. And do hereby provide, by these articles, for the indivisible unity and creation under God of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Madam Speaker, one need only read the words of our Pledge of Allegiance and National Anthem to know that they were chosen to reflect the country the authors saw in the future. We're seeing things, Madam Speaker, and we're hearing things. We're seeing things and hearing things, Madam Speaker. We're staying in the realm.
Anything is possible today.
We're staying in the realm, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, lines such as "One people united in love and service," "Pledge to excel in love and unity," "Pressing onward," "March together to a common, loftier goal." These words are instructive of how we as Bahamians should carry ourselves and live together in this country. We should not be killing our neighbors. We should be looking out for our neighbors.
Yes.
We should not be abusing women and children. We should be protecting them. We should not be content to see one another go without, or watching our young people waste their great potential in negative activity. Nor should we sit idly by complaining about what is not happening, while knowing that we all have God-given skills and talents that we can contribute to the building of our nation. We must strive to be standing perpendiculars in our society. Madam Speaker, when one sits with the stalwarts and elders of our country and hear them speak of the Bahamas of yesteryear, some lament the way that our country has changed. how people seem not to care about each other the way they used to. Somewhere along this 50-year journey, we have veered slightly off course as it relates to how we interact with each other, and that must be corrected. No amount of achievement in any sphere on behalf of our country is enough if we cannot safely and happily share this archipelago in love and service to each other. Madam Speaker, the pendulum of power has swung back and forth enough times for us all to understand that politics has its place, but our country, its sustainability, its growth, and most of all, its people must always come first. Always.
Always, no doubt.
In this vein, Madam Speaker, I must congratulate the member for Garden Hills, the organizers of the Carifta Games, and especially the young athletes from across this nation who did us proud here and at the Carifta Aquatic Championships in Curacao. This is what happens when we invest in our youth and encourage them in positive endeavors. I have no doubt that there may be future Olympians in the group who represented our country so well. Madam Speaker, with your leave, I now turn my attention to the bill before us here today. The existing laws and the kind of legislation that a country enacts contribute to the sustainment or destruction of democracy and the freedoms of its citizens. One of the more attractive traits of our country is the fact that we are a sovereign nation, a free people. And by that, and large, we respect the rule of law. The laws of this land are what protect us from each other and the foreign element. They are the great equalizers in a country that is split into silos. Our laws and customs are part of what attracts those who would do business here and live here. We must maintain our laws so that they remain relevant to the people and the country that they govern. Before us today is the Law Reform and Revision Bill 2023. The passing of this bill will repeal and replace the present act on the books, the Law and Revision Act, Chapter 3. In preserving our democracy and the rule of law, we must, from time to time, modernize our laws and ensure that there are no detrimental overlaps. A new revision and consolidation exercise in relation to the laws of the Bahamas is required, and the current laws must be updated to allow a more efficient approach to the revision and consolidation exercise. Madam Speaker, the current act was assented on the 12th of September 1975 and commenced the 2nd of October that same year. Over the years, it too has been subject to revision. This bill before us updates the administration of law revision, such as staffing and management, as well as the legal procedures to be employed by the Law Reform and Revision Commission. I'm sure Bahamians are familiar with the revisions of the Constitution that have occurred in recent history by various Constitution commissions that have resulted in referenda on citizenship, the judiciary, etc. This entity conducts the same type of work, except not on the Constitution, but on Bahamian statute law. This bill, Madam Speaker, reduces the number of commissioners from 5 to 3, and it also broadens the qualifications for those being selected as commissioners. The passing of this bill will allow public officers to be appointed as commissioners. This is laid out in sections 4 and 5 of the bill. Madam Speaker, an integral step in modernizing the Commission's mandate is the proper appointment of the Revision Commissioner. The law presently allows for a Reform Commissioner. However, the time-consuming nature of a revision exercise requires an experienced draftsman knowledgeable in the process of revision to focus on and oversee the same. The bill appoints a revision commissioner solely for the purpose of conducting and managing a revision and consolidation exercise. The appointment of such a commissioner will ensure the laws of the country remain updated and consolidated despite new legislation. Section 11 of the bill allows for the appointment of a revision commissioner to be designated by the Governor General pursuant to Section 5 to have responsibility for preparing and publishing a revised edition where such is required, causing the incorporation and consolidation of amendments into the existing revised edition pursuant to Section 25, and performing such other duties as provided for in this subpart. Section 13, subsection 1 of the bill also mandates the Law Reform Commissioner to submit a report on any aspect of his work every calendar year to the Attorney General. Section 25, referred to previously, lays out the manner in which incorporation and consolidation of amendments into revised editions are to be carried out. Section 6 of this bill lays detailed functions and powers of the Commission, some of which include, firstly, that it shall be the duty of the Commission to keep under review all the laws applicable to the Bahamas with a view to its systematic development and reform, including, in particular, the codification of such law, the elimination of anomalies, the repeal of obsolete and unnecessary enactments, and generally the simplification and modernization of the law. Section 6, subsection 2 indicates, A, shall receive and consider any recommendations or proposals for the reform of the law which may be made to the Commission by 1, the Attorney General, 2, public officials, 3, holders of judicial office, 4, attorneys at law, or 5, members of the public generally. Also, subsection B indicates that the Commission may prepare and submit to the Attorney General from time to time programs for the examination of different branches of law with a view to reform, including recommendations as to whether such examination should be carried out by the Law Reform Commission or some other body, undertake, pursuant to any such recommendations approved by the Attorney General, the examination of particular branches of the law and the formulation of proposals for reform, shall provide at the instance of the Attorney General advice and information to ministries and departments of the government and other authorities or persons concerned with proposals for the amendment or reform of any branch of the law. E, may obtain and use such information as to the laws and legal systems of other countries as it appears necessary, etc. Madam Speaker, in reference to the Commission's work, I wish to suggest that a key focus of the Commission must be the urgent review of our laws relating to family law and our criminal justice system. Before my election to this House, I was a practicing attorney at the bar and represented scores of persons seeking judicial assistance to obtain custody of their children or to prevent an estranged partner from interfering or abusing them and other matters connected to the family. Whilst I, along with my colleagues at the bar, did our best to advance our respective clients' interests, the unfortunate reality was and remains today that attorneys, magistrates, and judges are working within a system using laws that are not often fit for its purpose.
That's true.
Our Matrimonial Clauses Act is more than 140 years old
Wow.
and forces couples into a protracted adversarial war to proceed with a divorce. And expensive. I wish to note that this act has not been significantly amended. The Adoption of Children Act was enacted in 1954, over 60 years ago. And I know that there's been no significant amendment there either. Our Child Protection Act, passed in more recent times, continues to contain a legislative glitch in that unmarried fathers are determined to have no standing to petition the courts for visitation rights for their child. What makes this glitch so disturbing is that the new act followed laws passed in this House to eliminate the concept of illegitimacy. Excuse me, my sinus, Madam Speaker, please bear with me. Madam Speaker, the Bahamas requires sound and relevant laws to cope with change, progress, and development. The Law Reform and Revision Bill 2023 will greatly assist in modernizing the law for reforming, revising, and consolidating the laws of the Bahamas and for connected purposes. Can you imagine, Madam Speaker, a reformed penal code, a revised bail act? This is what we need in this modern society of the Bahamas. The functions and responsibilities of the Law Reform and Revision Commission have been clearly defined, and our country will be positively served by the work of the Commission. Madam Speaker, Franklin D. Roosevelt once said, "Democracy cannot succeed unless those who express their choice are prepared to choose wisely." The real safeguard of democracy is therefore education. This bill also updates the procedures for publishing the revised statute book once completed, so practitioners and the public at large may refer to and read copies of the statutes of the Bahamas online and obtain electronic copies that were before only available in print. This allows for greater accessibility of the laws to the people of the country. Knowing your rights and the laws of your country are just as important as having them. Though ignorance is no excuse when breaking the law, knowledge of the law and knowing where to find that knowledge and it being easily accessible is a privilege, not only to those who practice law and related careers, but to students, teachers, plumbers, electricians, and the everyday citizen. Madam Speaker, in acknowledging that no one is infallible, Part 3 of this bill provides for the rectification and correction of errors, consolidation of amendments, and the reprint of laws. Section 22, sub 1 states, if any error in law comes to the attention of the Commissioner during a law revision exercise carried out pursuant to Section 25, he shall, if he is of the view that the error is A, a minor one, rectify the error, or B, of significance, advise the Attorney General of the error, and the Attorney General shall, by order to be known as a law revision rectification order, rectify the error by setting out the required amendments to the law therein. Madam Speaker, I think it is important that Bahamians understand that nothing in this act empowers the Commissioner to change the substance or essence of any law passed in this place or any other place. This is stated explicitly in Section 22, subsection 3, which states that nothing in this act shall empower the Commissioner to make any alteration or amendment in the substance or otherwise affecting the meaning of any law or provision of any law. Section 23, sub 1 instructs the Commissioner to draft the bill for tabling in this place, should he find the need to alter the substance of any law. It reads, notwithstanding Section 22, subsection 3, if in any case it appears necessary to the Commissioner to alter the substance of any law, the Commissioner shall draft a bill setting out the alterations and amendments therein, and the bill shall be submitted to Parliament by the Attorney General for passage by both houses thereof. The rectification of omissions in law which occur by order of the Attorney General are to be laid on the table in this place. Madam Speaker, it is my hope that the Bahamian people know and understand just how important it is that they are aware of their rights as citizens and the statute laws which govern our country. They should also be aware of how to access the law for their perusal. Thomas Jefferson once said, ignorance of the law is no excuse in any country.
Right.
If it were, the laws would lose their effect because it can always be pretended. The good upkeep and awareness of the law is part of what keeps our country going. Now, it is not as sexy as agriculture, nor am I as sexy as the Minister for Agriculture. Nor is it a very exciting endeavor to most, but it is definitely a necessary and essential exercise.
Yes.
There are things that any administration, no matter their politics, Kalani, must undertake. And law revision is one of those things. I am confident that members opposite would support the law reform and revision bill based on the strong framework that supports the establishment and work of the Commission and the positive impact that the Commission can have on our Bahamian society. Madam Speaker, governance is a partnership between the administration of the day and the Bahamian people.
Right.
This administration is about the business of managing the people's affairs prudently and with reverence for their confidence.
Yes.
It is our intention, Madam Speaker, to leave this country in a far better state than which we met it,
Absolutely.
and to uplift as many people as we can in doing so.
Yes.
It is up to the people to ensure that they take advantage of every opportunity made available to them. As we replace and modernize legislation, we understand that we are creating the framework on which the next generation will examine and judge our efforts.
Right.
The role we hold is an important one at a pivotal time in our history as we move forward post-COVID-19. Now, whether or not we are found wanting is up to us as leaders and in what we prioritize here in this place. Madam Speaker, as I review legislation and policies in my office in the Paul L. Adley building, I wish to thank the hard-working staff of our office.
Yes.
They do a tremendous job, especially the members who work tirelessly in the Law Reform Department. I recognize that what we do in this place affects lives and livelihoods, and none of the people who have become household names for their time in government are known for trying. They are known for doing and for the positive results achieved through their actions that have impacted the lives of many. We must be doers, Madam Speaker, and not triers. We cannot and should not downplay our roles as legislators and administrators of government. Too many people are counting on us, Madam Speaker. Therefore, as we continue our march on the road to 50, it is with great pride that I stand here today as the Member of Parliament for Centerville in full support of the Law Reform and Revision Bill 2023. I so move.
Hi. Good job, Senator.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Before I call for the second, I'd like to move to the gallery, where we have some distinguished gentlemen here with us today. They call themselves the Brotherhood, and they're led by their president, Mr. Carlos Reed, and their vice president, Mr. Omar Archer. We welcome you to this honorable place today, where your motto is positive alternative to gang crime. Omar Thompson, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. And he corrected me yesterday, you know. Lord have mercy. Yeah, we're talking about that. No, yes. We're talking about law. Lord have mercy. I stand to be corrected. Please have that stricken from the record. Omar Thompson and others. And we welcome you to this gallery, and we applaud the work that you're doing to help young men and women in this country to stay out of gang violence. Now, back on track. Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Fort Charlotte.
Good morning, Madam Speaker.
Good morning, honorable member.
I'm happy to rise to second the motion of the second reading for a bill to repeal the Law Reform and Revision Act and to provide for the modernization of the laws of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas through their revision, reformation, and consolidation, which has been so ably moved and laid out by the honorable member for Centerville. Madam Speaker, just begging your indulgence to extend condolences to some families in Fort Charlotte and to thank the people of Fort Charlotte for affording me the privilege of representing them in this honorable house. The Curry family who lost their, Mrs. Curry lost her son, Marco Curry, from Infant View Road and a member of our defense force. The family of Miss Kelphine Cunningham KC, and a very distinguished former public officer in our country and distinguished lawyer and resident of Highland Park, and Miss Eulalie Miller Baptiste of Churchill Avenue. And I just want to say that to the respective communities, Infant View Road community, Highland Park community, Churchill Avenue, and the families of these departed loved ones, I express on behalf of the community our love and our condolences. Madam Speaker, the present legislation, the Law Reform and Revision Act, was passed almost 50 years ago. It was enacted 2 years after our independence. During this intervening period, there has been an explosion of social, economic, and cultural events in our country, as well as changing international circumstances, which have required that this Parliament amend, repeal, change the law, enact new legislation in order that the society reflects the contemporary reality, challenges, and opportunities. Madam Speaker, the law is not a construct for those of us in Parliament. It doesn't belong to any party. It is a common good which belongs to all of us. But it plays a critical function in the society, Madam Speaker, because it is the law that separates us from what philosophers have called the state of nature, where the outcome is determined by might. In other words, like a species that the lion or the shark is at the apex of that species and therefore controls the ecosystem in which they inhabit. But by this common good, Madam Speaker, we are able to achieve ordered society. And this public good has a direct bearing on human rights, the dignity of not only citizens, but persons, all human beings within our society, even if you are undocumented, as the Constitution talks about persons, and not only citizens. It also controls, Madam Speaker, the process by which we select the lawmakers and the people who exercise the general will on behalf of the citizens of the country. So what we are discussing today and what we do in this place, Madam Speaker, is of direct critical importance to every single citizen, irrespective of party, gender, nationality. Every person is impacted by the work we do. And the work we do, Madam Speaker, is not for ourselves. They are for the people whom we represent. So this public good, Madam Speaker, and I want to define what law is so that we understand that this isn't something for lawyers. This is something for the people through the pit road, the people through all of the different communities and islands of our country. If we see the law as a social process, in other words, the law involves an intelligence function. The more information we get, for example, the Bahamians who went over and fought in World War II, and most of them were black Bahamians, and they said they were over in Europe fighting for democracy, but when they came back home, they couldn't vote, they couldn't go into certain places. In other words, that exposure created an intelligence, an awareness, a consciousness, we can say. And we know that with that consciousness, the second function is promotion. They came back and they started to agitate. You know what they said, Madam Speaker, in 1958 when you had the general strike, and some of our parents and uncles and cousins marched from the airport up to Bay Street. You know what they said? They say, I is man. In other words, could you imagine you doing the same work as a white American, but they pay twice as much as you? So they said, I is man. Yeah. And they came up to Bay Street. And you know, Bay Street hasn't been the same since. In other words, what we call the promotion function. Because the idea, and we know as a result of that agitation, the company vote was abolished. Shortly thereafter, the plural vote was abolished. 5 additional seats, constituencies were created, and we had a raft of labor laws passed by this same parliament as a result of that general strike when Bay Street was confronted by the people of this society who were not recognized as full citizens and treated equally. It's the same thing that happened in 1830 with Pompey. Pompey with his family in Exuma. Lord Rolle wanted him to just leave his family and his farm and his garden and go and work in Cat Island. And Pompey said, why should I leave my family and go to Cat Island? And took a boat and came to Nassau. You know, Ronnie Butler memorizes, you know, say, crow smelled the fire. You know, and so in other words, we know that Pompey was standing before the British Parliament passed the abolition of slavery. In other words, the Haitian Revolution, but right here, you had Kate in Crooked Island on the Farquharson plantation, and we have Pompey in Exuma. And we know that all of that contributed to the abolition of slavery. And we know, Madam Speaker, even after and Black Dick, of course, another historical figure who fought for freedom and the dignity. And it was in this parliament, and we know that even after majority rule, as a result of the suffragists and also the movement by the Progressive Liberal Party, culminating in majority rule in 1967, affirmed in 1968. But, Madam Speaker, it was this drive to ensure that the majority had not only a voice in the domestic affairs, but also to speak internationally. And thus we had independence. Independence came through legislation. In other words, the Independence Order, again, was a parliamentary act. We also know in more contemporary times, Madam Speaker, women in this society fought against sexual harassment. And as a result of this agitation, based on the consciousness, you had this parliament passing in 1992. You had the Sexual Offenses Act, which outlawed sexual harassment and other forms of abuses. In 2007, thereabout, you also had the Domestic Violence Act that gave the court the authority to take a man out of the house, even if the property is in his name, if you can establish that there is a likelihood of imminent domestic violence. The court has the jurisdiction. So what we see, Madam Speaker, we are engaged in what we call the prescribing function, and it has an impact on everybody within the society. And of course, we know that once the law is passed here, the other function, or what we call the fourth function, is the invocation. A person can invoke the law and it gives them standing to go to court in order to get a remedy. And then, of course, we have the third branch of our government, the judiciary. The judiciary basically applies the law. Here's the party and looks at the law that this parliament would have passed and applies it. Then, of course, the sixth function is termination. In other words, what we're doing today, Madam Speaker, once this bill is passed, the law that is on the books will be terminated and a new law takes its place. And then, of course, there's the appraisal function. The citizens, the scholars will look at what exists as a law and criticize it, analyze it, and make recommendation. So this whole exercise of lawmaking does not only involve us, it involves everybody. Everybody. And as we will see as by the agitation in this society, we will see one day a bill presented in this parliament criminalizing marital rape. So we see that the laws are evolving as norms of decency, respect, and human rights evolve. We are reflecting the contemporary norms, how to give our people the best protection possible. Today, we are engaged in the repeal and the prescribing of a new statute to provide for the modernization of the statutory laws of the Bahamas through their revision, reformation, and consolidation, and to terminate or repeal the 1975 Act. The present bill is far more extensive, as the honorable member for Centerville has very clinically, and I would say forensically, described. One of the interesting things that this bill does, Madam Speaker, is that we see that the commission, as constituted by the honorable member of Centerville has laid out, is not only taking instructions from the Attorney General, but when you look and see at Section 6, subsection 2, it says that the commission, with respect to the systematic development and reform, shall receive and consider any recommendations for proposal for the reform of the law which may be made to the Commission by the Attorney General, public officials, holders of judicial office, attorneys at law, and, Madam Speaker, members of the public. In other words, this broadens the standing to include all of the public to make recommendations for the revision, for the reform of the law. So we see this is consistent, Madam Speaker, with the manner in which what I call the best practice, consistent with the inclusive approach in the process of the revision, review, and reform of the law. And we see that in part one, with respect to the appointment, and as I have just indicated, with respect to the receipt of proposals. It also tasks the Commission with this constant review of all laws applicable to the Bahamas. And what we see, Madam Speaker, is that the Act also empowers the Commission to engage consultants. In other words, to inform itself by the best practices globally and also the best expertise available So the commission has has the statutory ability to engage consultants in subsection 3 of section 6. It says, in performing any of its functions under subsection 1, the commission may from time to time consult any person who has specialized knowledge in any branch of the law or technical expertise in any particular field, notwithstanding that such person is not appointed to the commission under section 3. So here again, Madam Speaker, there is a recognition that though the commissioners themselves, who can be up to 3, are specialists in the law and various fields within the law, it also empowers the commission to reach outside of its constituted membership and get, for the benefit of the Bahamian people, the best expertise available in the execution of this very important exercise. Then you have the issue of codification. And Madam Speaker, when I serve as Attorney General, it is a very, very challenging process. And we were able to consolidate the law during my tenure. But you have laws which would have been passed by this Parliament. You also would have subsidiary regulations and rules made pursuant to the acts passed by this Parliament. And practicing in this jurisdiction is very difficult, because you can end up in court representing somebody. And even though you may have done diligent research, you may find that someone comes with a piece of legislation that you may not have found because it may not, it's not in the consolidation. And if you have not been keeping the gazettes independently, all of the amendments, you could very easily miss legislation that would have been passed. And therefore, by having regular consolidation, it gives not only the practitioners of law, but it also gives the citizen an easy way to go to the consolidated indices. Because you see these volumes that we have, Madam Speaker, you may say, okay, let me do some research. And you go to the volumes, but the volumes don't tell the whole story. And therefore, there needs to be regular consolidation in one place of the acts which have been passed, the amendments to those acts, and the regulations that the respective ministers would have made under the acts in one location, so that when one tries to ascertain what one's rights are, it is easy. Or if someone is representing someone, it is easy, and you have a much greater certainty in what the law is, in rendering advice, in ascertaining your rights, or in making submissions to the court. Madam Speaker, in terms of law reform, we know that, you know, like other places say, you may be small but Talawa. The Bahamas is one of those countries, Madam Speaker. Notwithstanding our size, as we saw with Carifta, as we see with the World Relays, as we see with the Olympics, this small country plays a very, very big role, way above its size. In other words, I believe, Madam Speaker, in this, I believe in exceptionalism. I believe that our history of survival have endowed us with a capacity to reach way beyond the territory of our country. And we see it in sports, we see it in financial services, we see it in tourism, we see it in terms of all of the various, in the diaspora, Madam Speaker. I mean, I know somebody, when I went to school, I'm just using this person as an example because there are many, many examples. And when I went to college, the Bahamian who I met and took me as a younger brother was someone, Madam Speaker, from Baintown. Didn't come from no privileged background, from Baintown. But he worked hard, went to Government High, represented the Bahamas at the Olympics, ran the 4x4 with Tommy Robinson and B.J. Nottage, and he became a professor of engineering at Columbia University, the first black engineering professor in the School of Engineering, and finished his career as a distinguished professor of engineering at Texas A&M. When the World Trade Center was attacked, the United States government assembled the top engineers within the United States. And when you look at that panel, Madam Speaker, one of those persons was Dr. Norris Stubbs. When you go to the United States Department of Commerce and you look at the patents that are registered, and you will see a formula registered, which all bridge builders in the world use because it's the formula that determines the durability of bridges. Now, Madam Speaker, right from here, right from Baintown, you know, and we see this throughout the world, from this small region, these extraordinary people. And therefore, Madam Speaker, to maintain our competitive edge, it must be through the law, it must be a constant reimagination, a constant innovation of what we are and what we do, so that not only in terms of the competitiveness of this country, but also in terms of what I call the norm of respect. Just like all of our guests in their endeavors working with young people and building a culture of respect in sports, in business, and in life, in relationship. In other words, this is what the law, one of the functions of the law, maintaining the standards of an ordered society. And therefore, Madam Speaker, this bill reflects the best practice. It also affords the maximum engagement of the citizens in the process of lawmaking, of law review. And as the honorable member of Centerville, and I will not repeat all of the various parts that he has so ably outlined, we see a framework and an institution that is at the very heart of this democratic process of maintaining an ordered society and providing access to all of us to the authoritative decisions of the society reflected in the law, reflected in the regulations made pursuant to the law, and also, Madam Speaker, reflected in the policies made by the policy-making organs of our state, which is our cabinet. An ordered society, but the authoritative decisions easily available to the citizens on whose behalf we act in this honorable House. So as I started, Madam Speaker, I will end by stating that this is not a partisan issue, but a national issue, and I recommend to honorable members support for this second reading of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, honorable member. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to repeal and replace the Law Reform and Revision Act to modernize the law by reforming, revising, and consolidating the laws of the Bahamas and for connected purposes. As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Anne's.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I rise on behalf of the constituents of St. Anne's to welcome the fine gentlemen in our gallery here today on the east side of the building, as well as on the right side of the building. Madam Speaker, I give my contribution on the Law Reform and Revision Bill 2022. This is a bill with several others that has remained on the order of this honorable House for some months now. Madam Speaker, I've looked at this bill and I've not found anything groundbreaking. Madam Speaker, this is a new bill, and if you listen to it, you would think we just created something that is going to transform the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. That this is a groundbreaking piece of legislation. This is a piece of legislation, to quote my good member from Centerville, that will leave this country in a far better state than we found it. That's what we should be aiming for, Madam Speaker. But what this bill is doing is saying we have a broken down car and we're going to replace the wheels and expect it to run. It's not malfunctioning because the tires aren't functioning, it's malfunctioning because the engine isn't functioning. And my point is, Madam Speaker, this piece of legislation is replacing a piece of legislation that's already in existence. It's been in existence, Madam Speaker, in earlier editions, but most recently since 1975. This piece of legislation, like the former piece of legislation, creates a commission that consists of persons formerly appointed by the Governor General, now appointed by the Prime Minister. Former commission, new piece of legislation, commission again. We have legislation like the Child Protection Act that needs to be passed through the attention of members of this honorable House. This legislation isn't going to change much to anything at all. I'm an attorney, been attorney in this country since 2001. I've never interacted, even though I was a member and chairman of the Real Estate Committee of the Bahamas Bar Association, I've never interacted with the Law Reform Commission. I don't think you can find 5 members of this House that can raise their hand and tell you the name of the current commissioners on the Law Reform Commission. The Attorney General, the former Attorney General said yes, but I don't know who the members of the Law Reform Commission are, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, what I'm seeing is that our attention is on amending the legislation that has created a commission whose job it is to amend legislation. I would prefer to spend my time in this honorable House amending legislation that the Commission has brought to this House for amendment. We are not really doing anything in our time in here today that was urgent, that is going to transform what we should be doing, and that is passing groundbreaking legislation for the benefit of society, the Child Protection Act, and for the development. We already have it. You know, it's like you take in a bed and you're saying, I don't want red sheets on it today. I'm going to put yellow sheets on it today. Nothing is really changing, Madam Speaker. That's my argument. You got the Governor General making appointments. Now you got the Prime Minister making appointments. But you still have the Governor General, Madam Speaker, who determines the compensation package for the commissioners appointed under this Act. Madam Speaker, if we wanted to get into particulars of this Act, I'll do that at the end, Madam Speaker. But I've identified that formerly the Governor General, now the Prime Minister, is going to be making the appointments. Previously, the appointees would be members from the judicial community. I'm going to read the difference now, Madam Speaker, from what it was to what it will be when this legislation is passed. By Section 3.2 of the 1975 Act, a person appointed to be a commissioner shall be a person appearing to the Governor General to be suitably qualified by the holding of or by having held judicial office or by experience as a legal practitioner or as a teacher of law in a university. That was the former criteria for an individual to be appointed commissioner by the Governor General.
Who recommends the Governor General?
Now the new criteria, Madam Speaker, that the Prime Minister has the decision of appointment over. It reads as follows. This is under the proposed 2022 draft. A person appointed to be a commissioner shall be a person who, in the opinion of the Prime Minister, is by reason of his special qualifications, training or experience suitable for his appointment to the commission. Nothing in there like there was before about having held judicial office or experience as a legal practitioner or as a teacher of law in a university. So interesting to me, Madam Speaker, two parts from this Section 4.1. It's in the opinion of the Prime Minister, and the person has to have special qualifications. Madam Speaker, I know the government side that drafted this legislation are well-intended. I don't quite understand the necessity of these amendments. Surely, with all that's happening in the community today, with the reports of incidents that we've heard from the Centerville community, we could be getting on with more important legislation that is before this honorable House. So while I wasn't taken back, Madam Speaker, by what this legislation's intentions are, I did note that the member for Fort Charlotte gave a representation that these appointees would still be from the legal community, but that they would be able to have expert involvement from people of several areas through the sections of this new legislation. That's a power that was always possible. This was always an act that included the ability for all members of society to participate in. The existence of the commission from 1975 was so that members of the public could make suggestions on laws that need to be changed in our Commonwealth. So again, Madam Speaker, I'm saying that the time of this honorable House is being used on legislation that is not actually transformative. It's not moving the hand forward for the level of progress that our country finds itself in today. I heard from Centerville and I heard from Fort Charlotte, and Fort Charlotte told us about the Burma Road riots, Madam Speaker. Fort Charlotte told us about Pompeii. We're celebrating our 50th year of independence this year. And we're still starting off everything we do with history that happened before we became an independent nation.
How did you become an independent nation? It's called the road.
Madam Speaker,
Road. The road
I'm in the middle of my 410, or 310, Madam Speaker,
you have to be born, right? You have to be given birth to.
and I don't think that my time needs to be what I would describe as wasted as one of the few, one of the 39 that have the privilege of representing this great country in this honorable House by spending time debating legislation that doesn't need to be amended. The member for Centerville said we have a Child Protection Act, which has a hiccup, a technical issue in it, where fathers don't have the right to petition the court for access. Now, if we can identify within ourselves, the 39 members of the House of Assembly, an actual piece of legislation out there that is going to impact society, like the good member from Centerville was able to identify, then that's what we need to be spending our time on in this honorable House. We don't need to be saying the commission that existed from 1975 to reform and amend laws, revise laws in the interest of the country is now going to start doing that. If they weren't doing that before, so that we have this issue of fathers not having the right to petition the court for access to children, why do we reasonably believe that the Law Reform Commission under the 2022 Act is going to make those changes? The good member from Centerville identified a very important issue, Madam Speaker, and that's what we should be amending in here today. That's what we should be debating in here today. So, Madam Speaker, while I appreciate the historic path that brought this independent nation to where it is today, I'm not spending time in this House of Assembly on a history lesson. I want to prepare this country for the future, Madam Speaker. And if the government is satisfied that that's what they're doing with this 2022 Law Reform and Revision Bill, I'm not going to stand in the way of any PLP voter that says next time they're going to vote F&M. I say, I agree with you. They had time in that honorable House, and I didn't see anything groundbreaking done in there. God forbid, Madam Speaker, if come 2026, after we've discussed it here today, those fathers still no longer have a right under the Child Protection Act to petition for access to their children, Madam Speaker. We need to get moving in 2023. The ambassador is not here today, Madam Speaker, but we have always been and we will always be, Madam Speaker, one nation, our legacy, and our future. Madam Speaker, with that, St. Anne's concludes his contribution to the debate, and I turn my attention to my great constituents in St. Anne's.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Fort Charlotte.
Thank you. Two things. One is the bill before us is recommended by the Law Reform Commission. Number two, the Governor General, under the Interpretation and General Clauses Act, save for his staff, acts on the recommendation of of the cabinet. So I just want to make those two observations, which the honourable member of St. Anne's is well aware of.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
Thank
St.
you.
Anne's, you may continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, from what has just been disclosed by the member for Fort Charlotte, the Law Reform Commission is proposing amendments to the act that creates it. What other pieces of legislation has the Law Reform Commission requested amendment to? Now, Madam Speaker, an important part of the legislation, Madam Speaker, that maybe the member for Fort Charlotte can get up again and explain is regarding Section 6 of the old Act and Section 25 of
The Chair recognizes the
New
Honourable
Act.
Member for Centerville. Thank you, Madam.
I'd just like to draw attention, my learned friends' attention, to Section 13 of the Act, subsection 1. That requires the Commission, Madam Speaker, on an annual basis to produce a report as to every single piece of legislation it considers for revision and reformation. Every piece of it. That is the substratum effect of what we are doing here today. So it's, and to be laid, as I indicated, on the table in this honorable house. It's clearly outlined.
The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Markham City.
Madam Speaker, I would like to ask the member for Centerville if he is at all in a position to say when was the last time such a report was laid in the House. Was it in the last decade? Was it 2 decades ago? I'd just like that bit of information.
The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Centerville.
Madam Speaker, I cannot indicate the last time such a report was laid. But as I indicated in my contribution, the effect of this bill is to ensure that what we do henceforth is carried out with due diligence, Madam Speaker. What happens before? And in addition to that, Madam Speaker, it's also one of the reasons why we've reduced the numbers of commissioners from 5 to 3, so the commissioners can have specific role and oversight as to what it is they will be reviewing and reforming.
Madam Speaker, so as not to prolong this matter. Section 13, Madam Speaker, so as not to prolong this matter, Section 13, Madam Speaker, is a section that was in the previous bill, and the research that we did recently for the last time up to the search for 2011. In 2011, nothing has been laid for between now and 2011. So I'm just saying, in terms of laying reports, the reality is no such report has been laid up to, our research says, up to 2011, no such report has been laid.
Yeah. Members, St. Anne's, please.
Fixing these things, I thought you was interested in information and educating the public.
Members,
As opposed to your legalism. We yielded to a member who was not up on a point of order. So stop that nonsense.
Members.
Put that nonsense.
Members.
Stop that nonsense.
St. Anne's.
Stop that nonsense. Stop it. Nonsense. Nonsense.
So, Madam Speaker, I've just heard Centerville, and I'm looking back at my pencil notes. I brought my pencil sharpener today so I can keep my notes tight. But, Madam Speaker, a pencil note that I said, Madam Speaker, a pencil note that I put on the back here is, I made the comment that instead of amending laws that we need to amend, we are amending an act that didn't need amendment, but needed action. The Law Reform Commission needs to be more active, Madam Speaker. The member for Centerville then commented about an annual report, and I think that in preparation for this debate today, there's kind of been cliff notes that have circulated around, because I've heard somebody else say, well, there's an annual report now. But 13.1, yes, under the new act, the commissioner shall, in respect of every calendar year, submit to the Attorney General a report on any aspect of his work on law revision. Groundbreaking? Let's find out. Section 5 of the 1975 Act. The Commission shall make an annual report of its proceedings in respect of law reform to the Minister, and the Minister shall cause the report to be laid before Parliament with such amendments as he thinks fit. The only difference, Madam Speaker, is the 2022 Act says in respect of every calendar year, and the 1975 Act says shall make an annual report. Now, you and I, Madam Speaker, we both know every year, annual is the same thing. So we've gone off and spent today's time in the House of Assembly amending a bill that's essentially identical to the bill that was already there. We don't need to amend legislation that isn't going to move the country forward. We need action by this Law Review Commission. And Madam Speaker, something that's important, because I've heard about this, ways in which the amended laws are circulated, the history lesson. Many of us know who are attorneys. There was once brown-bound books with gold writing and blue-bound books with gold writing. Those were the source for all of the legislation when I was a junior attorney. Midway through, those were replaced with revised editions that you found in these black-bound, almost three-prong puncher editions. I'm not sure what's on that side. Same thing, that's a subsidiary legislation over there and the legislation over here. And since these came out, Madam Speaker, within a few years, everything started to be updated online, and that's still in effect. But Madam Speaker, when I look at this new legislation, I'm going to touch on this point about how often the laws need to be consolidated. The good member from Fort Charlotte pointed out the real issue, that when you go to look at the law, you look at the original act, and you think everything's in there. Ideally, all amendments should be in there, and that's what the consolidation exercise is about. If you look at the original act, then you have to try to make sure you get the Gazette on a monthly basis to see if there's any new legislation that's impacted the act. Each law firm, each attorney ends up consolidating the legislation historically for themselves. Under the old act, Madam Speaker, by Section 6, this is the 1975 Act, it shall be the duty of the Commissioner to A, prepare at such times as the Governor General may by order direct, but not more often than once in every 5 years, a revised edition of the statute law and a revised edition of the subsidiary legislation. This is from 1975, before I was born, before my older brother was born, or right about that time, Madam Speaker. But in 1975, they determined that there was need to put a limit of at least once every 5 years for these laws to be consolidated, so that it's easier for members of the public, not just the attorneys, but easier for the members of the public, the laymen, to know what the law was. I think there was a quote today from more than one U.S. president, and one of them was the fact that ignorance of the law is no excuse. Yes, that's where you find yourself when you appear before a magistrate or before a justice of one of our courts. They'll tell you that the ignorance of the law is no excuse. And truthfully, even for lawyers, it's a bit of a maze to be certain as to what the current law is as it relates to every section of a particular piece of legislation. But back in 1975, they said, guess what? We're going to commit to consolidating that maze at least once every 5 years. But under this new day 2022 legislation. I'm going to read now what it says at Section 25. Incorporation, subheading, incorporation and consolidation of amendments into revised edition. 25.1. The commissioner, and I get these words, the commissioner shall from time to time, conduct a law revision exercise to incorporate and consolidate all of the amendments into the existing revised edition. Now, I would be saying, okay, there was a lot of things in this act that didn't make today's use of time important or necessary for us to focus on this bill. But if that section alone had said, the commissioners shall every year conduct a law revision exercise to incorporate and consolidate all of the amendments into the existing revised edition, I would have promoted this through my constituency, Madam Speaker, rather than being critical of it today. Okay? I've been critical of it today because, in my opinion, it's not really changed the playing field. It's not groundbreaking. It's not what, you know, my white truck outside, four-door, stick shift. I call it my steel horse because I can do things in the constituency. I can do things in the House of Assembly. But it's got a license plate on it, MP39. So when it comes to the totem pole, Madam Speaker, I'm at the bottom of the totem pole. But I'm hungry, Madam Speaker. I'm very hungry for the little bit of time that the people of this Commonwealth of Bahamas permit me, that God gives me on this great green earth. And Madam Speaker, giving me an annual report on what you've been doing isn't groundbreaking. If this legislation was to say that we were to have a consolidated, revised edition of the law every year so that members of the public knew that if I want to find out what the punishments are under the criminal procedure, what the rules are under the Criminal Procedure Code, I can pull up the act. I don't need to hire a KC to be sure. I can find out the law for myself, and I can conduct myself out on the street in a particular way, knowing what the law is, and knowing that if what I'm doing is not against the law as I know it, I'm going to be free from arrest. But without a revised edition of our laws, Madam Speaker, at least every 5 years, which is too long, but to 1 year, if I knew that every year I could check out the government website, Laws of the Bahamas Online, and go through the penal code and know this is what I can do and this is what I cannot do, that I'm more likely to keep myself and my family and my friends out of being found on the wrong side of Lady Justice. Madam Speaker, it's not too juicy, it's not exciting, it's not sexy. I mean, this piece of legislation is the same as the 1975 piece of legislation. We went down to a maximum of 3 commissioners so that they could focus on different branches of law. We didn't get any information on which branches they're going to focus on. Those 3 are going to focus on. Madam Speaker, this hasn't been the best use of my time this morning, you know? You know, if I knew that we were going to be debating the Burma Road riots in here, if we were going to be debating the Roll estate in Pompeii and his family, you know, I mean, it's so cute how they all can kind of sing the same thing, the same divisive rhetoric. This House of Assembly is about the future of our country. My history of the Bahamas and being a Bahamian is the same as yours, member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini. What was that? What was that for, Charlotte?
Member, address it here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, so having given my debate contribution on this lackluster, non-groundbreaking law reform and revision bill, I would like to say a few words about my constituency, Madam Speaker. We had two matriarchs leave since we were last in the House of Assembly, and I'd like to extend condolences to Myra Moss and her family on the loss of Myra's mother, Winifred Tika Patrice Moss. I would also like to extend my condolences to Harleen Munnings Brown. Both ladies were from the wider Johnson Road community. Both of them I've met before, lovely ladies. I think that the loss of a mother is devastating to just about any child. And with the family structure that we have in the Bahamas, it's a great loss for not just the children, but the siblings and the wider family makeup. Madam Speaker, the good member for Golden Isles, Minister of Environment, has been working hard with his ministry, and I'm proud to announce for my constituents that they should begin to make preparations for a cleanup campaign in St. Anne's, where there will be tips positioned in multiple areas within the boundaries of the constituency. I know that they're looking at Blair. I've also suggested Sunset Ridge Park, an area, a spot in Winton where there seems to be a lot of dumping in abandoned lots, as well as at the end of Prince Charles, close to McPherson's Bend, which is a large empty lot that people will use for parking when they go to enjoy and bathe in the water there, in the shallow waters. So not only will there be tips for constituents from the Ministry of Health, but they also will have a few vehicles coming around. Once I have the details, I'll circulate those details on social media. But generally, if you have an appliance or something of a similar nature that you need to remove from your yard or from the inside of your home, there will be vehicles, trucks, with a few workmen to each truck that will pick up those items and remove them from your roadside. So this is another fortunate event for the great constituency of St. Anne's, and I give notice to my constituents, and I also would like to thank the Minister of Environment, the member from Golden Isles, for making sure that St. Anne's, the great people of St. Anne's, were included in this island-wide exercise. With that said, Madam Speaker, I conclude my contribution to today's debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many, the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Elizabeth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Elizabeth.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, there's a lot to be thankful for in this 50th year of our independence. I thank the Almighty God for the gift of life and his many blessings. I thank the Progressive Liberal Party, this great party, whose policies and philosophy, like my own, put people first. I thank the great citizens of Elizabeth for the privilege of representing them, the Honorable Prime Minister for my appointment, and the hard-working staff in the Ministry of Transport and Housing and in our various agencies. Particularly this morning, I want to thank the hard-working staff at the Attorney General's office for the efforts they have put into bringing reform to our laws and modernization in a way that makes it more user-friendly. I thought it funny, Deputy Speaker, the comment from the good member of St. Anne's. He's referring to history and trying to suggest he was not enthused by the speech made by the honorable member for Charlotte. And afterwards, he went into his own history by reading from 1975 legislation to suggest we should just stick a pin there, as opposed to the revised legislation that we are debating today. It's almost like a little oxymoron, something you were trying to suggest was an irrelevant update to the law, and also suggesting it was an irrelevant contribution of history. So you kind of was debating your own speech. But Deputy Speaker,
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marco City.
Mr. Deputy, I don't intend to violate on this occasion the tradition of not necessarily mentioning for the what is shouted from person's seats. But let me just say this with respect to the last comments made by the member who's presently contributing. There is a consistent attempt to paint a picture of one of our colleagues in terms of a lack of appreciation of the history that we all in here share. And so I just want to make the point for those who just tune in, that there is a shared appreciation for contributions of Bahamians with all hues, lest we leave on the record an impression that members opposite on more than one occasion have sought to paint in this place.
Thank you, honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Elizabeth.
Deputy Speaker, the one thing I learned is in leadership, right? Comprehension is so important. You got to be able to comprehend. And I guess with some legal training, I am able to comprehend and interpret on a level that some persons will never be able to understand because they lack the key, simple principles of leadership. One being comprehension. Comprehension. So getting up on your feet, yelling across the room, wasting our time with foolish matters when it does not even connect to the point that a member was making. But you're vying for leadership. Anyways, I leave that point. I leave that point right there. Let's move now, Deputy Speaker, to the relevance of today. And I pray to God, comprehension takes over the mind of some that lack it. Deputy Speaker, on yesterday evening, I had a time in my constituency visiting with some family members, some of which lost loved ones, and I want to use this opportunity to pay condolences to the families who have lost loved ones in the Elizabeth constituency Some I may have gotten a chance to do personal condolences, and some I may have not. We lost Miss Alice Newton, and I pay condolences to her family who are grieving at this time. We lost Miss Sonia Charlo. I pay condolences to her family that is grieving at this time. And Mr. Glinton, my boy, I pay condolences to his family that's grieving at this time. Our thoughts, our prayers, and our love is with them as they go through this time of mourning. In a lighter note, I got a WhatsApp message from a colleague of mine and just giving me a little tip about the excellence that lives in Elizabeth. We know excellence lives there. But just one more name was added. My colleague from GG, Golden Gates, gave me the tip that Elizabeth constituency houses, or is the home, constituency home of the Carifta, the young man who brought the first gold from the Carifta sport for the Bahamas. Our first gold was brought by Mr. Caden Cartwright in the javelin in the under-20s. And I got an opportunity to meet Caden last night. We sat, we talked. It brought so much joy to sit with that young man and see the dedication and the work. Talk to his grandmother, talk to his mother who was coming in from his brother at swim training. So she just have a lot of sportsmen she's raised. And we are so proud of our young people in the country, but it's even more important to give that extra support to our young men. Just to keep them out of trouble, to boost their spirit. And so I was delighted, Deputy Speaker, to be able to sit with Caden. Everyone hears me brag so much about Diore Scott. She got the silver Camara from Nabi. She brought in the gold and a record. And, yeah, man. So we have some Olympians. That's right, Gigi. Member from Golden Gates, we got some Olympians living in Elizabeth. So we expect a little bit more to brag about. But we're so proud of the work that they've done, Deputy Speaker. And I thank you for allowing me to come off topic a little bit to give my condolences and also to congratulate. Deputy Speaker, I rise to contribute to the debate on the Law Reform and Revision Bill 2023. The Law Reform and Revision Bill is to repeal and replace the Law Reform and Revision Act, Chapter 3, and to modernize the law for reforming, revising, and consolidating the laws of the Bahamas and for connected purposes. Organized in 4 segments and in 33 sections, the bill is comprehensively and concisely arranged to ensure clarity and precise delineation of responsibilities and thorough application. The major segments of the bill, Deputy Speaker, include Part 2, titled Constitution, Appointment, and Functions of the Law Reform and Revision Commission. Part 3, titled Rectification and Correction of Errors, Consolidation of Amendments, and Reprints of Law. And Part 5, titled Miscellaneous. 4. Under Part 2, the guidelines of the complement of commissioners are outlined. Section 3 of the bill makes clear that the Law Reform and Revision Commission shall consist of not more than 3 persons appointed by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister. The qualifications of appointment as commissioner and the appointment and tenure of commissioner are outlined in sections 4 and 5 of the Law Reform and Revision Bill. On the opinion of the Prime Minister, commissioners shall be appointed by reason of special qualifications, training, or experience, and a public officer is permitted to serve as a commissioner. Many of our public servants have so much information and detail and guidance and advice on policy, and so it's important that they're able to elevate to different levels in our sector in building our legislation to be able to better grow our country. Commissioner, Deputy Speaker, the responsibility is clearly outlined in Section 6 of the Law Reform and Revision Bill 2023. Under this bill, the Commission is mandated to keep under review all the laws applicable to the Bahamas with a view to its development and reform. In Section 7, the bill makes provision for there to be a Director of Law Reform and such other public officers to assist the Commission in carrying out its function. According to Section 9, the Commission is required to prepare in respect of every project of law reform a paper detailing information that includes, among others, the history and scope of the project, existing legislation, and surveys. Deputy Speaker, that's important for our public, because many times we come in here and we debate legislation, we pass laws, but there's no real guidance to the public on the history of why the revision is important. There's no real guidance to the public on the scope of the project or what we are trying or intending to achieve with the revisions. And then to speak to the existing legislation and also surveys, meaning that we have passed it through the public, associations, important groups, giving input and getting guidance of what they suggest will work as a society. So it's an almost all-inclusive exercise to be sure that when we come in and debate on the time that the people has given us, not wasting it, on their time, we're debating legislation that, one, they can appreciate, one, that we've taken our time to guide them on, and the other one, that when we pass it, we know its execution will bring true value to the lives of our people. And so these are important revisions. In Section 11, the Commissioner shall be appointed to have sole and specific responsibility for preparing and publishing revised edition where such is required and causing the incorporation and consolidation of amendments into existing revised edition. A commissioner will be responsible for the maintenance of the electronic database and records with specific responsibilities that include the maintenance of electronic database and existing revised edition with any amendments. The electronic database will allow for members of the public to have easy access to laws for amendments to be made quicker and the consolidation of laws. Yes, and I can go a little deeper, man, because access, better access, user-friendly, easier digestion for the public. Well, you may think it's already there, but your level of understanding may be far higher than some others. So we're bringing it closer to home. You know, you're my good friend. I support you. If you throw your hat back in the race, I got your back. Deputy Speaker, to give an example, the value-added tax has been amended many times. Many times. The act has been amended every year since its introduction, sometimes multiple times in a year. Yet today, we do not have a consolidated copy of the value-added tax, right? All of these attachments. Value-added tax amendment act 2022. Value-added tax amendment 2021. What this one is? They just print all of them and give me it. Value-added tax amendment regulations 2018. Value-added tax amendment regulations 2019. All of these pieces of law. And you know, my good friend from St. Anne's, you know how it's done in legal practice, that we put it together ourselves, but we're saying the commission now going to do that job so the public, not just the lawyers, the public is able to have this access, read, review, and see and appreciate the amendments and what it's replaced. That, in layman's terms, look at my good friend from Pine Ridge helping me in all. Layman's terms. That's what's important. Deputy Speaker, provisions are included for rectification and correction of errors. And we have them. Usually we find them after the fact. And so this will help to clean it up. Clean it up. And with respect to the Ministry of Transport and Housing, as we have been doing our review internally, there are some pieces of legislation, we've had a few meetings already, that we are seeking to advocate some amendments to, and I think that the updating and this process will take us to that level where we have that easy transition of information from the public servants working in the ministry and what they see working and what is not working, what they see is stale dated. We have the Housing Act. How old is that legislation? And the last amendment was in 2009. 2009. I've had about 4 or 5 housing fairs. And if you hear the questions and the queries of the persons from the public, and many times it makes sense what they're asking. Are you guys able to build on our land? We have land, but we don't have the means, to just go straight to a bank. But we're making the good money and we're paying our rent on time. Are you able to come and build on our land? These are questions. The Housing Act restricts us. We have to build on the land in the housing inventory, which we acquire either by application to Lands and Survey or by purchasing from a private. So I would have to purchase their land through housing and then build and then sell it back. So these are simple suggestions and recommendations. While you are working in the ministry, you learn what has been working and the times that we're living in now, what is probably not working. So, Deputy Speaker, this isn't a frivolous task, what we're debating here today. This is a debate that is warranted because we're modernizing every aspect of our society. We can't take ownership from that alone. From past administrations, you've seen it. You've seen the way it was done. We've watched decisions that were made sometimes within a day during the pandemic because after review you've seen maybe that policy ain't working. Maybe locking down at this time don't make no sense. Maybe the alphabet shopping ain't really the alphabet because too much rolls in the country. So how much rolls you can have on one day? No, I ain't knowing my MP. That's my MP now. I complimenting my MP while I giving my contribution. That some of them changes you were making made sense based on the information you were getting at the time. It wasn't working. So we had to come back. Remember That's a little plug, but that plug is to help my good honorable member from St. Anne's understand revision is important. Revising legislation as we move with the times. It is important for us to do it. Oh, yeah, he can say, I said it wasn't important.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Anne's.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the member for Elizabeth is making representations as to my understanding, and she is incorrectly representing what my understanding is. I haven't heard a single thing from her today where she's saying that this piece of legislation is doing something other than the existing piece of legislation, and that's a waste of time, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Elizabeth.
We know how the side opposite go. They use their points of order. That's the only time they can come in here and be abusive with their language. I made my representation to why the revision is important. I will not go back through that because I'm sure the public appreciate my contribution more than what they heard right before me. Right? The only thing of relevance before was what St. Anne say about the dumps getting clean, and that's what my member from Golden Isle's doing. So let's give a hand to the member from Golden Isle for doing his job.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Anne's. Is this a point of order?
Yes, Madam Speaker. The member for Elizabeth is misleading,
Deputy Speaker, sir, let me help you out.
the House. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the member for Elizabeth is misleading the House. He's made reference to the act creating a need to revise and compile the legislation. That was there before. All she's doing is reading from the PLP game sheet as to what this piece of legislation is doing, when in fact the old piece of legislation did the same thing. This legislation is only introducing that the Prime Minister will appoint the commissioners, and that there is no longer a need to do a compilation of the legislation every 5 years, but from time to time. That's nothing to brag about. There's nothing new under the sun with this New Day administration.
Thank you, honorable member.
Can't allow members to stand in the middle of a presentation by a member to insert what he said just a bit ago. At the end of the day, Mr. Deputy, nothing substantive suggesting that there's a point of order.
Thank you, honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member
Mr.
for
Deputy,
Elizabeth.
I actually would like to correct the member for St. Anne's, and I'm not going to go into too much of a back and forth with him, right? Because it's really irrelevant. If there is one word in a piece of legislation, I'm a lawyer, sometimes we say shall, and then you change it to may. That's an amendment. That's an amendment, and it holds importance. Because if you say shall, it doesn't matter if it's there. You were trying to say we here debating without relevance. It's in the legislation to you. But you've already positioned that. So I didn't mislead by saying the revision is important. It is to me and the public. And so don't stand on your feet and suggest that anything I said was misleading. Why you may not agree, and we can have difference of opinions. That happens every day of life. You on that side because your opinion different from mine. And the people who voted for us, opinion different from the people who voted for yours. There's difference of opinion. Nothing's wrong with that. But don't try to interrupt my very good debate by done practice in my head. And see, I would have had a little bit more fire to come, because I thought I was going at 3. I was in there having a little chat with my MP. They tell me I push up, so I just got to give you what I got, and I know it got you a little uncomfortable, and you see, but this is what it is. It is what it is. I got to give it how it comes. We are making amendments today to our laws to ensure that the legislation that we are executing remains relevant. Yes. Relevant to the times. Yes. So the improvement to the Law Reform and Revision Bill, improvement. You do improvements throughout your life, even in your own self. It leads, well, we hope everyone does, but it will lead to reform, revision, and consolidation of the laws. And so I'm satisfied. I, the member for Elizabeth, Deputy Speaker, I'm satisfied that the functions and responsibilities of the Law Reform and Revision Commission have been clearly defined, revised, and that the work of the Commission under this new legislation will have an even more positive impact on the Bahamian society. And so therefore, Deputy Speaker, with that contribution, minus out the interruptions, I fully support the Law Reform and Revision Bill 2023. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, it is once again a privilege to speak on behalf of and for the exceptional and wonderful people of the East Grand Bahama constituency. I've heard the contribution of the member for St. Anne's, and also heard the part of the contribution for the member for Centerville and for Fort Charlotte. The Law Reform Commission is one of those important sectors that I believe we all could agree needs to be updated. I think when we look at the 1975 Act, there also, when you look at the wordings of the Act, it does need to be updated. But I do agree with the member for St. Anne's that you cannot oversell something that what you are putting on the record. I mean, what you are putting on the record is changes. There are some minor changes that are being made to the Law Reform Commission and the Law Revision Commission. But you cannot sell it, oversell it in its importance and in what it is going to accomplish in the country. You are doing your job, you are doing what needs to be done, but you are not revolutionizing the Law Reform Commission. What you are doing is making changes, necessary changes, to the law. But there are so many more things. There are so many more things that actually need to occur for this to make sense. The bill has not been simply updated or amended, but you have chosen to redo it. Even though you have repeated, and this is the point that was being made, even though you have repeated a lot of what was already in the bill. So you cannot present this bill and present the section that says that you are going to put in place a new annual report when the act itself already puts that in effect. It already speaks to that. So you can't take credit for something that's already in the law. That's the point that's being made. Speak to the changes that you have made and justify the changes that you have made.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Fort Charlotte.
Mr. Speaker,
Well, what's the point of order?
Mr. Deputy, we are all familiar with what is currently available to the public.
What is the point of order? State what the point of order is.
What is not available to the public, any act not yet brought into force. All laws repeal. In other words, this particular repeal law takes into consideration technology. In other words, an ongoing updating, not having to wait for 1 year, 2 years, or 5 years. It's taking into account technology and areas and items which are not currently available when you go on online. It's not there, and this is very useful.
Thank you, honourable
Very
member.
well.
We on this side, Mr. Deputy, we on this side, we do support the efforts that is being made. We support the changes and support those things that are being made. Mr. Deputy, I believe, though, that successive governments, that there has been, and I believe the member for for Centerville. I believe the member for Fort Charlotte would agree with me when I say that there has been challenges with finding good quality draftsmen and women in the Attorney General's office. Now, if you were coming and presenting a plan on how we could recruit additional quality draftsmen, then I support you 100% because that is something that is critically needed. That is something that is critically needed in our system. It is not a talent that can be used outside of government. And as an attorney, I don't know an attorney who comes out of law school saying that I want to be a draftsman. I want to be a quality draftsman. Nevertheless, it is a vitally important skill required for a developing nation. And that is something that is drastically needed for the betterment of our country. The process of drafting and consulting on our laws is critical for the success of our country. Now, when we look, Mr. Deputy, at Section 3, when we look at the changes in the Law Commission Section 3, which changes the number from 5 to 3. Again, knowing the fact that you need additional draftsmen, you need additional persons to assist in terms of this process, I still have not yet heard a compelling reason as to why you would reduce the number from 5 to 3. And I would like to, at the end of my presentation, you don't need to do it now, but I'd like to get an understanding of why you would reduce the number from 5 to 3, knowing that we need more draftsmen, knowing that we need more talent, knowing that we need more things. So you could speak to it in your wrap-up. Section 4, there is, again, no special qualification other than in the Prime Minister's opinion that you are someone who should be appointed to this commission. All of the sections, Mr. Deputy, that I've seen, I've looked at England and their law reform commission. I've looked at Hong Kong. I've looked at Barbados. I've looked at Mauritius. They all have a specific legal requirement. So at the very least, you ought to be a lawyer. And in some instances, it is worded the way that the law is worded, the law is worded today. Not what we are changing it to, but what the law is as it relates to the law today, which is you are a former judge or you are someone who is in legal education. We have former judges or we have existing judges, and we have a law school. We have persons who are qualified legal teachers. So my question again is, why have you decided to move away from the legal requirement and now leaving it open to anyone that the Prime Minister determines has a special skill or experience to deal with these matters, when other countries throughout the world have limited this to lawyers? They have said you have to have, you are in fact not just lawyers, but specific lawyers. They've limited it to where there are judges and where there are also legal education professionals. Mr. Deputy, also, it is anticipated that their person, or it is anticipated that their person will also be someone who retires from being a judge and moves directly into the job. We see this section that speaks to a pension and that it is a public officer and so on, which again leads me to the belief that you want to leave this open to public officers and not just former judges, former legal professionals, but you want maybe someone who is a former permanent secretary, maybe someone who is some other public officer to also be into that area as well. It could, if it is a director of legal affairs, that would be wonderful. If it is a former other legal professional who is also a public officer, that would be wonderful as well. But my question is, why take away that legal qualification from being appointed to the commission? I think that's the main question. Members of Parliament also, Mr. Deputy, should also be able to submit projects to the Law Reform Commission. Now, we've seen the list in the Act, but the list does not speak to members of Parliament. Now, if you want to include members of Parliament as a member of the public, then so be it. But I would also recommend that you put in there members of Parliament should also be able to prepare projects, prepare for specific pieces of legislation. And we're not talking about the members of cabinet. We obviously are talking about the backbenchers, and we're talking about members of the opposition. That those persons should also have a part to play, and those persons should also be able to submit those items, those projects to the Law Reform Commission as well. Mr. Deputy, there also should be a designated, or there should be designated officers who are made available to members of Parliament during their presentations. So, for example, and this goes on for both sides, that there are pieces of legislation, detailed pieces of legislation, that members of Parliament who may not be lawyers, members of Parliament who may not know anything when it comes, know much when it comes to different pieces of legislation, the Law Reform Commission should make officers available to all members of Parliament to give specific briefings on those areas of those pieces of legislation. It provides, Mr. Deputy, for a much more quality debate when all of those who are participating in the debate have fully understood the piece of legislation, can articulate their different points of view on the piece of legislation, and can then give their views in terms of those pieces of legislation. It simply requires the members of the Law Reform Commission to be appointed, to be designated, to say, you are going to allow for a presentation on this particular bill, that particular bill, available for members of Parliament to participate in those debates. I agree it could happen, and I agree that it should happen more, and why not put it in the legislation that these things should be made available, and that one of the functions of the Law Reform Commission is to educate not just members of the public, but also educate members of the House of Assembly in their debate. Also, Mr. Deputy, well, again, we don't have a system of a parliamentary draftsman. So this is the closest to a parliamentary draftsman. The only issue is that they will be taking their directives from the Attorney General. So if they've taken their directives from the Attorney General, the question is, are they completely independent? Are they a part of the Parliament? And so on. But outside of that, if we do not have a parliamentary draftsman yet, this is the closest to it. So we should utilize this as a means to be able to educate, to inform the public, but also to be able to educate different members of Parliament on how we debate and how we educate ourselves with these pieces of legislation. Mr. Deputy, there also should be designated officers for members of Parliament to be briefed on the proposed legislation. As I said, the quality of the debate would be better. The consultative process also for things like the marital rape bill, for other pieces of legislation, should go through this process. And as a part of this process, the members of Parliament should also be included in that learning consultative process, also when it comes to the debate. We should be looking at the systems of other countries and pulling from those systems of other countries to see what is better and what we could use, what we don't need to have, or what we already have, to be able to pull from those things. Now, Mr. Deputy, I just want to, as I said, I believe those on this side support this piece of legislation, but there is something that I would also wish to speak about, and that is the proposed increase in water rates for Grand Bahama from the Grand Bahama Utility Company. Mr. Deputy, permit me to raise an issue that may actually need the Law Reform Commission to take a look at, because it does involve the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement, and it does involve legislation that enforces or puts in place the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement. This is a recently occurring issue, and it's still a relevant issue, where the Grand Bahama Utility Company, which is a private company that provides water in Grand Bahama, has made a proposal to increase the water rates in Grand Bahama. Now, what stuck out in my mind was the same time that they made the proposal, the same time that they put forward their proposal, the Grand Bahama Port Authority issued a separate statement under their heading saying they are pleased to review this and review it and their wordings were review it in a fair and transparent way. So, honestly, it would not have stood out in my mind as being a ridiculous statement if you did not know that the owners of the Port Authority, the shareholders of the Port Authority, are the same owners in the water company. Now, I understood, Mr. Deputy, why this was put in place to begin with. Obviously, it was put in place at a time when Grand Bahama was not developed. It was at a time when Grand Bahama needed to be developed, and you needed to put in place certain incentives to bring in those investors. Grand Bahama has matured. We have gotten to a place where there should be an independent and a separate review body for an increase in water. The process to determine the increase in water rates in Grand Bahama must be fair and must be conducted by an independent body. This day and age, in 2023, it cannot be right for a private company who supplies water to say to an affiliate private company, we're going to review you and we're going to say whether you can increase the rates for us. Because in essence, it's us that you are increasing the rate. You are increasing the rate for. It is a conflict of interest. It is a complete conflict of interest. Now, in New Providence and throughout the Bahamas, water is provided and regulated by the Water and Sewage Corporation. However, if there is a rate increase, it would have to be approved by the government, the cabinet, who is accountable to the people. So before water and sewage could increase their rates, the government would have to approve that. And they will have to go to the people, and I would even suggest that if they were going to do it, they would have to come here, the Parliament, to at the very least say to the people, we are going to increase it, this is why we can increase it, this is the rate we can increase it by, and so on and so on. But what is being done in Grand Bahama is not the case. It is not the same situation that is being done. Now, there's also talk about IRCA, but IRCA does not regulate water. IRCA regulates electronic communication and electricity. So it is difficult to say we're going to just put in place a system where IRCA will be able to come in and regulate the water when it comes to dealing with this particular situation. Also, the Grand Bahama Port Authority is not accountable to the people of the Bahamas, but they are accountable to their shareholders. That is something that we cannot overlook. It is something that we cannot just gloss over. Their first obligation, their first legal obligation is to their shareholders, not to the people that they provide water for, which is a problem. The Grand Bahama Port Authority has in its statement committed to a fair and transparent process, which will be impossible when the decision is made by the Grand Bahama Port Authority, whose shareholders are the same as the Grand Bahama Utility Company. Even if the information is true and correct, the process is tainted. Even if what they present to the public is true and correct, the fact that they are making the decision taints the process. This is why, Mr. Deputy, the government must step in and participate in this process. And I accept that the ministry, the Minister of Grand Bahama, has issued a statement basically saying that the process is the process is not sufficient, that you want them to go back and look at their process. The government must sit with the Grand Bahama Port Authority to determine a process that is truly fair and independent. And this is where it becomes tricky. How will the government do that? The process will not be fair or transparent if it is left to themselves to make a decision. The government has made a statement, but it must go further. Do not allow the Grand Bahama Port Authority to simply say, this is the way that it has been. When a response, when we first made this case, and I believe the minister made her statement, the response that I heard was, well, this is the way it is. We regulate ourselves. We cannot allow that to be their response. We cannot be satisfied that that is their response. This is also not a fight that the government has to have alone. We are prepared to sit with you and the Port Authority to ensure that there is a fair and transparent process. But we are not prepared to sit quietly and just let it happen. But we are prepared to sit at a table with the government, with the Port Authority, to say to them, we must all come up with a fair, transparent process that the government is satisfied with, the opposition is satisfied with, and most importantly, the people are satisfied with. Who will deal with also, one of the considerations in this is who will deal with all of the issues raised by consumers who had their appliances destroyed because of all of the salty water that was presented during that time. And we all who lived in Grand Bahama, we all suffered with having to bathe and clean and cook with salty water. They made a case out to say they decreased the rate in water, yeah, but we had to suffer through salty water. So we were paying for faulty water. We were paying for salty water. Also, the Grand Bahama Port Authority and the Grand Bahama Utility Company must also seek to partner with other communities throughout Grand Bahama to include more people on their system, which would also lead to more revenue. We believe that there are communities throughout Grand Bahama, some communities, who get their water from the ground and pay for their pump and their system. We believe that they should partner with those communities, put in place the infrastructure, put those people on the water company's system so that their revenue could increase and they would be able to pay for all of their expenses. Maybe not pay for all, but also pay for some additional expenses. And thirdly, who is looking at the rate that we in Grand Bahama are paying for water? Is this a fair rate compared to what others are paying in New Providence and what others are paying throughout the Caribbean? We should be able to say that based on what the water rate is in Nassau, based on what the water rate is in Barbados and Jamaica and Florida, that this is a fair rate for water in Grand Bahama. Because what others have reminded me of was years ago, the water rate was a third of what it is today. That's what was presented to me, was that the water rate was significantly lower than it is today. So who is judging this? Who is making that determination? An independent body should be reviewing this and should be looking at this entire situation. So, Mr. Deputy, as we have said, we support what is being done here. We don't believe you should oversell it. You are amending a piece of legislation that was done in 1975. So we understand that. But don't oversell it. And what we are also saying, Mr. Deputy, is that when it comes to the Grand Bahama Port Authority and the Grand Bahama Utility Company, we believe that it is impossible for them to review and provide an assessment on the increase in water rates because of them being owned by the same shareholders. And we believe that the government must step in and must sit with the Port Authority. And we also believe we would also participate in those talks as well, but should sit with the Port Authority to come up with a truly fair and independent mechanism upon which we all could agree with. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Pine Ridge.
The member for East Grand Bahama would have sat in the same seat that I'm sitting in now when he was Minister for Grand Bahama, and would have gone through all of this that we're going through now with the Grand Bahama Port Authority. Pardon me? Well, you were there and you understand the Hospital Creek Agreement and how it works. But I can assure you that this government, from day one, has been addressing these issues with the Grand Bahama Port Authority. And we will be deliberately focused on the regulation and how it works. There is actually a court order right now that deals with, I think, the power company and the Port Authority and its regulation, and our administration is on top of it. So you don't have to worry about that. We've got it. Okay?
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Deputy, I thank the member for Pine Ridge. She's correct. I did sit where she's seated now, and the assurance is not just an assurance to us, but it is an assurance to the people of Grand Bahama that we also support when it comes to ensuring that the people of Grand Bahama feel that they are being looked after and that they are being fought for. So we accept that.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Pinewood.
Mr. Deputy, sorry.
I would like to reserve my position for after the break.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini.
Yeah, Mr. Deputy, we now move for the suspension for lunch to return at 3 o'clock this afternoon.
Before we do that, I would just like to say on behalf of my colleagues, to the SIB officers who had a major fire today, I can see that you guys still made it out here this morning to protect us. So I just want to say thank you very much for...
Mr. Deputy, we join you in that, and I'm sure the side opposite joins.
Thank you, Honorable. Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the business of the House be suspended until 3 p.m. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. The business of the House stands suspended until 3 p.m.